Welcome to Class 3, which will encompass rotoing organic type shapes such as humans and animals. Okay, so here I have a shot of someone riding a horse, and let's talk about approach. I need to figure out what needs to be rotoed depending on what might be added, removed, or changed from the shot. Perhaps the sky needs to be enhanced, or this BG wire needs to be removed. Let's take a look back here. Or maybe even the ground, these tire tracks need to be removed and a new ground needs to be put in. So when I play back this shot, I'm thinking about how to separate my objects, being the rider and the horse, into different parts that make the most sense for the compositing process down the line. I'm going to slow this down a little bit so I can see it better. Okay, so for this shot, I would start with the rider. And so I'd separate out the head from the hat because I'd like to keep organic and more hard-edged objects separate because the motion blur and edge treatment might be different from each other. And then here I have this foreground arm. There's a background arm that's barely visible in a few frames here. And then we have this hand up here holding on the hat. And I'm going to rotate those separately, and I'm going to put them in the same layer though, because I don't think I'm going to have to put anything in between the foreground and the background arm and hand. Yeah. And then I'm going to separate the torso into front and back shapes because I find that makes it faster to roto, but I can put them in the same layer to be used together because most likely the edge treatment will be the same for both shapes. And same with the rider's leg. There's still some frames where that needs some articulation here, and I'll add that into that layer as well. And then we have the rider's feet down here. So I'm going to keep the feet separate from each other because they're essentially separate shapes, but together in the same layer. And also those shapes are over a different part of the background than the torso. And so the edges might need to be treated separately from the rest of the rider because we have a sky up here and we have this brown terrain down here. So I'm just trying to think ahead, like what might need to be separated out. And it's good to do that in the beginning instead of at the end of the process. And now we'll think about the horse. So I think I'm going to split up the horse into several different layers. I'll separate the body into several shapes, such as the head and the ears, the harness, the neck, the front torso, and the back torso. And I can put them probably all into one layer because I think the edge treatment might be similar and the motion blur quality looks pretty similar. Yeah, and then we're going to talk about the legs. So I would roto each leg separately, and I would roto each and put each leg into 3 separate sections because there's 3 different parts of the leg. We have like the upper leg, the lower leg, and then we have the hoof area. And they all move differently from each other. But I'll put each leg into its own layer for organization purposes, and that will help prevent me from mixing up my shapes while I'm rotoing. So if I mistakenly mix up the same leg parts that belong to different legs, then my motion blur will be incorrect. And what's also nice is that I can lock a layer or individual shapes so that finished shapes won't be mistakenly selected and altered. So that helps as well. And then when I'm done, I might just put all 4 legs into one horse leg layer. That's a possibility. So yeah, this shot is definitely challenging with the extreme motion blur. In these cases, I'll rotate to where I think the parts of the legs are and occasionally check the motion blur. And I'll go over that a little bit later. And then we have the mane and the tail. So each of these parts will need, each needs separate layers that contain 1 articulated core shapes for the tail and articulated core shapes for the mane. And then they're each going to need their own layers with the hair shapes. Okay, and so last we have the reins, which are super hard to see. Maybe I can, so you can see some here and here. Yeah, they're really hard to see, but they still need roto shapes. Okay, so the last thing to consider is if I'm going to utilize tracking to assist in making my roto. And my general rule is that if I have to spend more than 5 minutes trying to get something to work with a track, then it's usually just not going to work, and I have to find a different way. But and while I use tracking most of the time, for this shot, I don't think it will benefit me for these reasons. It's short, and the movement is fast and organic. I'll change the frame rate again, the playback. And in a shot like this, it's helpful for me to see the horse galloping across the screen in an unstabilized mode. Yeah, and in fact, the time I spend tracking or trying to track, I could be rotoing and just getting the job done. So before we start actually making some shapes, I'm going to go over the roto node, the roto object list, layers, and touch on some shape preferences. So here is my roto node. And here is the overall node parameter window. I'll bring that up a little bit, where you can set parameters. Associated with the roto node is the roto object list, which is right here, and it shares the trees panel. So I've previously made some shapes to help me describe the layers and shapes. So I have layers and shapes inside this object list, but you can also have point trackers and tracking shapes in here as well. Silhouette's a layer-based system where the layers hold roto shapes and tracking shapes. The layers actually take on the motion information as their primary role, so that anything that gets put inside a layer will have the same movement as the layer. And this is good because the shapes you make inside a track layer do not have keyframes on every frame, and that really helps with the editing process. And point trackers, they live outside the layers, and you perform a little step to apply point tracker data to layers, which will be shown later. But in this shot, we are not utilizing tracking, so the layers are just used to organize shapes. Okay, you can add layers by using the plus button here. And then you can name your layer. And then you can make a shape. And then your shape is inside your layer. But say if I make a shape and it's not inside a layer, for example, like this, I can drag, well, I can just drag that out of my layer. I can drag down the plus icon, and it makes a layer just like that. Okay, so you can delete layers by just clicking the delete key. You can nest layers inside of other layers. And you can drag them back out. So it's really helpful. Furthermore, layers and shapes, and trackers for that matter, they each have their own object window where individual parameters can be edited. So I have my layer here. I have an object list for my layer. And if I click on my shape here, and I'll just turn that on, we'll turn on, how about this one? Torso. And then you can see that my spline here, my shape here, has its own object window here. So all those parameters can be edited as well. So one thing to keep in mind is that with all the parameter windows, it's like a hierarchy. You have your roto node window here, and you have your layer object list, and then you also have your shape object window. Yeah, so that would be layer object window and shape object window. Okay, next we're going to go over the icons that are in the object list. The layers and the shapes each have their own set of icons, and they're just a little bit different. So I'm going to bring up the user guide to help us out. So I'm going to go up to the help menu. I'm going to select user guide, and I'm going to search for shape icons. And I can see here are the shape icons. Okay, so you can see that with the shape icons, you have all of these different boxes here. So you have, this is the view, so it would be left or right if you were working in stereo. Otherwise, you don't have that option. So here we are not working in a stereo shot, so we do not have that box for a left or a right. Here's for the roll if you're doing a morph, you have an A or a B. But in our case, we are just, we're not doing any morphing, so that box is not available to us. And then we have these other options, which are there always. It's the opacity, the blend mode, so you can perform cutout operations inside layers and export them or use them that way. We have the invert button, motion blur, the color of your spline line, a lock button, and visibility. And then this little notes icon as well, because you can add notes. So those are the shape icons, and then we can go down to the layer icons. Let's go down here. Let me use my mouse. Okay, and these are the layer icons. So here they're a little bit similar, but just there's one key feature to pay attention to. So here I have my layer here. Of course, I have to go back to the user guide. And you can see that while I do have this choice, if I was working in a stereo shot, I would have this box where it would be left or right. But I have this box to right here, which says active layer, and there's a check mark next to it. And that's really important to pay attention to because, for example, if I'm applying tracking data to my layer, I have to select, make sure that the layer is selected. And that's how you know that it's active with the check mark. And then we have a blend mode, and then we have invert, and then we have color of the layer. I don't really do much with that. And we have the lock and the visibility. And so this visibility, for example, this controls all of the shapes inside your layer. So if this is turned off and you turn on the visibility of a shape here, then you still won't be able to see the shape. You have to make sure that the visibility is turned on the top of the layer. Okay, so those are the icons. And like I said, the most important thing to remember about the layer icon is the check mark. So we'll close the user guide. Okay, next I'm going to go over some of the shape preferences. I'm going to zoom in here. I want to delete this shape. Actually, I'm just going to delete this layer by hitting the delete key. I don't need it. And I'm going to click on this shape we have here. And we're just going to go over some of the preferences that are relevant to what we're going over right now. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the shape preferences. Silhouette preferences, and we're going to go to the shape area. And we'll talk about a few of these things. So we have lots of different choices here. Colors we can set. We have active point color, and we have auto switch to reshape tool. So I'll go over this a little bit later, but that's when after I finish making a shape, it's automatically going to switch to this reshape tool over here, the arrow, and then we can immediately start editing our shape, and that's really handy. And then we have our control handle size. If I want larger points, then I can turn this up. I hit apply. You can kind of see that that's kind of interactively see how large the points will be, but we'll just change this back to 5. And then control point color, the default outline color. So you can see that, first we'll hit apply, make my point smaller. So I have a blue selected here, and that's my default outline color. And you can see whenever I make a new shape that the color is blue. And of course you can change that to whatever color you want. And then I have a default reshape tool here, which is the normal. The other choice would be a magnet. And that affects the editing of the splines, where if you have your points selected and you drag them, that it will move the points closer to the cursor. They will move farther away. So that's a really neat feature. And then we have the thing I want to show you here is the tangent vectors. So if you say that if you like to work with the tangent vectors on, you can turn that on and you can see them around your shape. I have them off. And then another thing that I like to show you is the show feather handles. So if I apply that, oh, and let me turn this off first. Okay, that's not showing up, but I'll show you. If you check this box and hit apply, you will always see the feather handles on your shape. And so I'll show you that when I close out of this. But I tend to keep it off because it's a little kind of in the way when I want to edit my points. And to turn that back on easily when I'm editing, it's just the hotkey, the shortcut, which is Alt F. So, okay, so that's just a little bit of information for your shape preferences. I would suggest going through all of these and taking a look because there's a lot of ways you can be very specific about what you're rotoing with and how you're rotoing. And if you aren't sure what some of these are, they're listed in the user guide under preferences. Okay, so that is what I want to show you there. And we'll just quickly show you the feather handles because I talked about that. Alt F, and now you can see those are the feather handles, but I have them off when I'm making and editing my shapes. Okay, finally, let's start by making some shapes and learning about the editing tools. I'm going to delete this shape right here. I'm going to start fresh. Actually, I'm not going to delete it. I'm just going to hide this one. Okay. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to start with the front torso. So I'm going to make a layer. I'm going to call this horse torso. And I'm going to select my spline type, which is going to be the B spline, or B for the hotkey. And I'm going to start making my shape. I can zoom in with the plus key. And the more exacting I am when I make my initial shape, then I have less editing after I close it up. I'm sort of taking care to not having a sharp angle when I don't want to use this part of the line up on the horse. I want to have sort of a fade when I'm overlapping my shapes. I want them to overlap and kind of share a little bit of the same area in between the shapes. So then I can pan around and put my points into place. I'm taking care where I'm putting my points so that when I animate my shape, I'm going to try to have this point in the same area on the next keyframe. And that'll prevent me from having some rippling. So if this was in a different area on the next keyframe, you would see it traveling along in between frames, and you don't want that. I'm able to delete a few points. And I know that's where I'm going to have my overlap. Okay, so I'm going to just call this front torso. All right, so we're in the reshape tool here now, and then I can show you the magnetic reshape as well. So I'll click that again, or if you just click the R key again, you'll toggle in between the modes. So if I click R, I'm in the regular mode. If I click R again, I'm in magnetic. So it looks like a little magnet. So if I select all the shapes here and I drag here, you can see that where the points selected closer to the cursor move more than the points that are farther away. So that's kind of a neat and handy tool for editing. All right, Command Z. And now we'll talk about the transform tool. I'm going to go back to the regular edit, the regular reshape. So if I click T, and so the top icon here is the transform tool, which is good if you want to like modify an entire shape or multiple shapes at once. So if I click T, you can see I have a box around my shape, and now I'm going to edit the whole shape. And I use the hotkeys Q, W, and E to make my edits. So W stands for rotate, and if I click the W key and I click down, you can see that that is where my pivot point is. So if I put my pivot point there and I want to rotate my shape, that's how that works. And then to get out of the tool, you click W again. And then you are back into just a straight translate. And Q is translate again, so that's pretty self-explanatory. And E is scale. So if I want to just freeform scale, I can do that. If I want to do it uniformly, I hold down the Shift key. And then click E again. and then I'm out of the editing mode for scaling. Another way to set the pivot point is you click the period key. So now you can see that's where my pivot point is, and I can move that around. And then say if I want to rotate, well, it actually hits where the cursor is, but in any case, you can use the period to set the pivot point. Okay, so then we'll get out of that mode. And so if I want to say, I want to select a group of points and transform those as a whole shape or part of a shape, I can select my points. I click the T key again, and then I click T twice. So it's T and then T again. And now you can see I only have this group of points selected. And this is really handy if I only want to rotate part of my shape. Because the whole goal is that you don't want to move individual points because you can get a lot of chattering and some jittery motion that way. So if I hit the W key, now you can see I can rotate my shape, but I'm just rotating that group of points. And I'll get out of the rotate mode. And then another editing function or editing option you have is that if you're in the transform shape tool, you can hold down the Alt key, and then you can kind of move around. You select one of these little handles on the side, and it sort of is like it kind of warps things into place, or kind of corner pins things into place, and that's really handy. And that's a nice option to have as well. Okay, so I have made one keyframe, and you can see down here that my keyframe is showing up on my my time bar here, and it's also showing up in my my timeline down here. So when I look at this shape and I'm going to make my next keyframe, it's fairly linear, and so I don't think I'm not looking for any extreme movement here, like up or down. It's just moving straight across. So I'm just going to go for certain intervals, and then I'm going to just roto in between or make keyframes in between that. So if I pick maybe go 12 frames, that'd be 83, and then I can just select all the points. It's Alt-Shift-A, and I use that a lot, and I can either manually just move it with my cursor like that, or I can move it as a shape. If I select T, I can zoom in here and move my points into place. If I think my shape needs to be a little bit bigger and I don't want to move individual points, I click the T key. I select the E for scaling, and then I'm scaling my shape, and maybe W, and I'm going to rotate it. And then after that, maybe I'll click the R key and do a little bit of manual point movement. And like I said, I'm trying to keep my points in the same location on the shape when I move it. And then I can go in between, Alt-Shift-A, I can click the T, and I can just move it into place that way. I can use my arrow keys. So if I want to nudge 1 pixel, it's just the arrow keys up and down, or left and right. 10 pixels is Shift up and down, or left and right. Left and right, up and down. And you can edit those values inside the preferences. And there's also the ability to do subpixel movement, which I think is great. It's set to 0.1 in the preferences as a default, but I set mine to 0.5, just a half a pixel. So if we zoom in here and I hold down the command, I think it's Control, Command, or Command key, and I hit the arrow keys, you can see it's barely moving. But sometimes you need that that really tiny movement. Okay, so we'll zoom out. I'll just do a little more editing. And you can see when I'm making my selection here around my points, I'm drawing it by a square selection, like a square selection tool. There's another option you have, which is using the lasso. And so if I want to use that method, I can hold down, when I'm dragging around my shape, I hold down a Control or Command, and you can see now I have a lasso. And you can actually swap these preferences inside the silhouette preferences as well. And you can make the lasso your default selection method. But I keep mine on the rectangle. Okay, so we've done a few shapes for the torso and done some editing. And now let's move on to the legs. They're a little bit trickier. So I'm going to zoom in here, and so I'm going to make my first shape on a frame where the object is in focus. I'm going to try to find a frame where the foreground front leg is in focus. So how about, okay, let's see. Let's try this frame 6. Okay, so when I make, let's make a new layer. I'll call this FG front leg. Actually, I'll call that, how about horse, FG. Okay, because my shapes inside might have similar names, so I want to make sure I'm being organized. Okay, so then I'm going to start with making a first shape. I'm going to keep this leg into 3 parts because I know when I analyze the shot that the leg moves, each part moves a little bit differently. And I don't want to have to move the whole shape at once for the entire leg. It's a little more efficient to do it this way. And then down to the hoof. I'll zoom in here. I'm going to make sure it looks like a hoof. Okay, so now I have my shapes made for my leg, and I'm going to turn off this one so it's less distracting. So I have some choices. Either I can go, when I'm keyframing, I can go to where the shape is at the next extreme movement. So maybe, let's see. So the horse is running along. It's the front leg. Maybe around here before it sets its foot down again, around 74 or 75. So I can either do that, and this is like such you can't really even see what's going on here. So I have a choice. Either I can move all my shapes at once and make a keyframe and move it here, and just edit them into place. But sometimes when I am rotating a shot like this, and I know I've spent some time making my initial shape, and if I go to where the horse puts the hoof down again, I can actually, sometimes I'll just make my next keyframe there, and I can reuse my shapes pretty fast, so I don't have to recreate them again. So if I had made my next keyframe during that extreme movement, it wouldn't look anything like this at all. And then when I got back to this frame, I would have to, again, recreate this shape. So here, that was pretty fast. And now I have, I can go in between my keyframes with Shift Z and Shift X. Let's zoom out because there's a lot of movement here. And let's take a snapshot. So if a snapshot here, and then I have a vertical split, and I click on that. Okay, well, let's go back to this frame. We'll click the snapshot. And then you can see okay, there we go. Just took me a little while to get that. So here now I'm comparing these two frames. And so now they're pretty similar. And so I think, I could have done that before I actually made my keyframe, but that way I can just reuse my shapes really fast and then do the keyframing in between for the extreme movements. So I'll turn off the compare, and then I'll go to my in-between frame here, and then make my keyframe so I don't really know what the leg actually looks like here. So if I want to select an individual shape here and not all my other shapes, I can select a point on this shape, Alt-Shift-A. Oops, there we go. Oh, I have to deselect here. Okay, we'll do it that way. And I'm going to select T, and I'm going to hit the W key to rotate. And I'll move my points into place. And the same with this one. I think I'm going to rotate from the middle, set the pivot here. All the while thinking, you know, what might this leg look like if it were a little more opaque. Okay, so there is my in-between shape. Let's see what it looks like in between. And now I still have a lot more roto. So with shots like this that are fast-moving organic shapes, you're going to have a lot of keyframes. There's really no way around it. And so now you can see how it gets confusing about, well, what, you know, do these shapes, they belong to this leg or this leg? So that's why I break things up into different layers. Okay, so now let's take a look at a feature called the roto overlay. I have a couple keyframes here, and if you want to check, you can see your motion path, the motion blur, and this other, it's not the motion blur, it's the onion skin. So here we are down here. I'm going to turn these on. And to see this feature, you need to make sure, if you want motion blur to show up, that you have motion blur turned on for all of your shapes here. So they're all selected. If I click that icon, you can see it turns on the motion blur for all of them. And then I have to also go to the roto node and activate the motion blur. And so this is a little bit memory intensive. So you just have to be careful. Like if you don't want to see it on all the time, you should just turn it off because it'll use up all your memory, which is motion blurs like that. So now you can see your motion blur. It's pretty nice. So now let's look at all the other parts of the roto overlay. So to see the roto overlay, you have to have the shape selected that you want to see. So now you can see all my shapes are selected in here, and now you can see the shape move across the screen. And see how, you know, maybe if I have multiple shapes up here and a leg had gotten transferred to a different leg, that would show up. So this is really handy. And the yellow outline here, if I zoom in here, so that's the width of the motion blur. So here's my shape, here's the width of the motion blur, and then you can see the overlay of the shape of the leg. So let's try some hair shapes. I'm going to turn off the roto overlay. I'm going to disable the motion blur. And we will start with some hair shapes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my leg splines here, and I'm going to go down to where I've made a copy of the core tail shapes. And I'm going to turn on my layer. Now you can see what I've previously done. So it's hard to know how much to roto as far as the core or hair. So I've gotten pretty far, but I know I'm just going to need some more details here with the hair. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'll call this tail hairs. And I'm going to make some open shapes, and I'm going to look at my look at the shot and see, well, where should I start? So we'll make some hair shapes around this area. I'm going to zoom in, and you can make open shapes with any of the spline types, Bezier, X spline, or B spline. But I'm going to use the B spline right here. So click B, or click on the icon, and I just need a minimum of 3 points, and then I can hit the escape key or hit the R key, and I can be editing. So what I do first when I make hair shapes is that I make them in groups inside my layer. So if I want to maybe have four open shapes here, I'm not gonna do the width first or the blur. I'm just gonna make the actual shapes. Because if I change the width, it's possible that it's going to be harder to see the hair spline on the little tiny object because it actually increases the width of the shape. Oops. I have to remember to hit the R key and then the B key again. So now I have four hair shapes. Let's zoom in. Okay, they're kind of in place where I want to be. We're kind of going for perfection here, so let's try. Yeah, it's a little bit challenging, but I'm going to try to move my hair shapes to where I think they might be on this frame. I want to transform them all at once. I hit the T key, the W. Maybe I'll pull them up like that and move them in. Oops, get out of that mode. And now I can move them individually. Okay, so now I made a couple, some frames of hair, and I want to change the width because right now they have no width at all. So we'll actually looks like I have. Okay, so I go down to my tail hairs layer, and then here I am with the splines. I'm going to select them all, and I'm going to give them a width of. I'm going to give them the width of. Let's do 2, and then I'm going to give them a little bit of a blur. And then I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to click on the end of this point here, and I'm going to choose Alt F. So you see that's going to bring up 2 handles on either side, and one is the width, and the other one is the feather. So I'm going to pull that in. So now you can see if I turn off my tool overlay, oops, I don't have to do that to actually just select away so I don't see the lines that it's a point. I can select this one. I can do the same. As well as that. So now I have a point at the end of my hair. And we'll cycle through the alpha overlay. In the alpha, I can turn off my tool. You can see that I have some hair shapes. I'm going to go back to the RGB. And so another thing we can do if I wanted, I can increase the feathering. Like if I select this and I want it to be a little bit softer as it meets the tail, I can do that. As well. So I have some hair shapes, open shapes or hair shapes that I wanted to be that were even more fine, like a width of 1, or if I wanted ones that were like a width of 3 or 4, I would probably put them in a separate group. And then I could change these qualities all at once instead of having to go through each separate one and changing them individually. So these are the open splines. Okay, so let's look at the final shot. I do have a completed shot in here, and we will take a look at that. Here's my roto final. I'm going to take this down a little bit. Okay, so you can see that in the end, I'll pull up my roto object list. And I have the horse legs here. I have, actually you can pull this off. Actually, you can, if your roto object list gets really big, you can actually undock it and you can expand it a lot as far as you need to go. But I'm just going to put it back in because I'm just working on one screen right now. I'll try that again to get back in the correct panel. So I've separated, well, the horse legs are all separate, but I've also given them different colors. And I usually just work with one color of spline, but in this case, it helps me keep track of each leg. So I made sure that my shapes were not transferred to a different leg. And then we can take a look at the different hair shapes that I've done for the mane. So we have the mane, and we have mane hairs, and then we have mane hairs thin. And we get a better idea if I go up to my slap comp. So typically I have a source node, I have my roto node, and I have my slap comp here. And you can see I can kind of gauge what my roto is going to look like. I can turn on the motion blur. And down at my comp again. And you can see with motion blur turned on what it's starting to look like. So then if I see something that I need to change, I will turn off the motion blur. I go back to my slap comp. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a separate window. So up here, I'm going to open up another view. And I'm going to click the plus button, and I'm going to choose my slap comp. It opens it up not docked, but you can dock it if you want. I'm going to zoom in here. So let's just say, for example, okay, well, I want to pull this edge in a little bit more, and I kind of want to see it as I work on it. So what I can do is I'm viewing the slap comp. I can go over to my roto final here. Let's find that saddle shape. I can choose these points. I'll turn off the feathering, Alt F, and I'll just bring that in. And you can see that it's updating in this window over here. And that's really helpful. Okay, and then last I will talk a little bit about opacity. I'm going to close this extra window. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And as I play along, you can see I have this shape floating around here. And you have to wonder, well, is that a problem? Did I forget to animate it across the shot? Or did, what happened here? So if I click on the shape, I can tell that I can find it in my roto object list. Well, the opacity is off. So I know it's not there. And I go down to my timeline, and I can see I have an opacity keyframe here, and it's off. So you have a preference here, like if you can turn the edge opacity off or the shape opacity off, but if you want to not see it in your viewer, you click the V key, and that toggles it on and off. And that's pretty helpful. Let me go back to that shape. So now you can see that when I click V, it disappears, and if I click V again, it turns back on. It's off, but V is just a way to view it. So if you think that you can't find a shape, or is it off, is it not off, you can just click the V key. And another thing I want to mention here is that earlier when I talked about loading in Python scripts, instead if I don't need a shape anymore and I want to turn off the opacity, like I can either click this icon here, which is sometimes, you have to be precise, or I have assigned in my Python script as Alt-O, and that toggles the opacity. So instead of clicking here, I just choose Alt-O, select the shape, and you can see now that it's toggling the opacity on and off. You can see it in the timeline here, and you can see it next to my shape. So I find that really handy, and that's one reason why I like to have little custom scripts. Okay, this is the end of class 3, rotoing organic shapes, and I'll see you in the next class.